Max Scherzer was traded for Ronald Acuna Jr.'s little brother? We'll talk about that on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On Mets, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Well, Max Scherzer was traded. First segment today, we're going to talk about that. Second segment, talk about the return. And third segment, what happens next. Before we get into any of it, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. Also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, I have to get the locale of my recording right now. I'm sitting right outside the hotel in my car. I decided, hey, I know it's the trade deadline weekend. Really, I wasn't thinking about it that much when I planned this out. It's my 3-month wedding anniversary. I thought, hey, I'm going to take my wife, little one-day trip on a Saturday, go somewhere a couple hours from home, do some fun stuff. Didn't really think it through entirely. Had an amazing time, and I really thought when I woke up today and we started on this trip, I'd be fine. That the Mets weren't going to make a splash. It was going to take a long time if they were to trade a Max Scherzer or a Justin Verlander, and I didn't even think Scherzer was on the table. I thought, hey, worst case scenario, Mark Canha's traded, maybe it can wait till tomorrow. No. Instead, you get a blockbuster. Instead, you get what could be the biggest move of the deadline, and a stunning one at that. Max Scherzer traded to the Texas Rangers, essentially taking Jacob deGrom's spot. Jacob deGrom, if he's healthy this year, if he didn't have to get Tommy John, he's the ace of the Rangers. They're even better than they already have been, and they don't need to trade for a frontline starter. But instead, they're in the market. And we thought it would be for Justin Verlander. Reports are they always had their sights set on Scherzer. And they get this deal done by giving up one prospect, but it was a very good prospect. And we'll talk about that part of it in the next segment. I want to focus in more on the fact that Scherzer's gone before we dive into the fact that Ronald Acuna Jr.'s little brother's on the Mets now. Max Scherzer just had a start against the Nationals where he looked good. After the game, he said he has to have conversation with the front office to find out the direction. Those conversations happened at some point inevitably because a lot of conversation had to happen today for this trade to go down. And you can look at it in a lot of different ways. You can look at it from the Scherzer perspective and, hey, here's a guy that wants to win now. This is a guy that doesn't have that many cracks at it. He's healthy at the moment, and he gets to go to a really good team in a fun race in the AL West and gets to still try to pitch to win a World Series. He had to agree to this trade. He had a no-trade clause. So he had to agree to it. And part of it was agreeing to pick up his option, which was a slight snafu in the trade process of, Scherzer wants to maintain his option. Ultimately, there were some amendments to his contract. We don't know what those are as I'm recording this right now, what it means. The money, I think, is the same. But to essentially guarantee that player option, he had a couple demands that probably had to be met, and that might have been the only thing to it. The idea that Scherzer was going to not let this happen because he wanted the flexibility to opt out of a $43 million contract always seemed absurd to me because there's no chance he gets it on the open market. Do you know what Max Scherzer is valued on the open market right now? He's getting paid by the Rangers for the rest of this year and next year $22.5 million. It's about what he probably would have made on the market. And that's for the rest of this season, which I don't know how the money's split yet. I haven't seen that either. Like how much are the Mets eating next year, this year. Sure, we'll do all this, and I'll explain it on future shows. But what we know is the Mets are paying $35 million, or maybe a little bit north of that. And the Rangers is $22.5 million. So the Rangers are for a year and I guess a couple months for 45 starts of Scherzer, something like that, They wanted to pay $22.5 million. Now, they're also, in turn, to get him at that discount rate, giving up the third best prospect in their system, a guy that's instantly the best prospect in the Mets system. But that is the breakdown of this trade from the financial side of it. And so for Scherzer to have denied opting out, like, what was he actually going to get in the market? So that part of it, it always seemed that it was going to get done because ultimately Max Scherzer opting out of his contract and hitting free agency, maybe the best he does is to recoup that $43 million over a couple years. But even then, I don't know. And now he has a chance to pitch out this contract. And if he wants to keep going, he can get another contract. So financially, it never made sense that he was going to decline the option. I get maybe he wanted to keep the ability for it. But what's he going to do in the last couple starts of his season to actually change what his market would have been next year? Now, from the Mets' perspective of deciding to give up Scherzer, we'll get to the what's next element on the Justin Verlander in the final segment. But just giving up Scherzer for this year, Scherzer's been pitching to an ERA over 4 this year. Your team, at this point, is a seller because the chances of you making a run are slim to none, and you're turning the page to the future. So the final couple months of the season, they might not be exciting. You never know. The team could still play better than anticipating because there's still a lot of good players left over, and maybe they're just freed up. They're just, they're in spoiler mode. They're just trying to ruin other people's seasons, and maybe they get back in the mix. But the bottom line was, this year has been cast aside. That's the way the front office is operating. They have set their sights to 2024. So what the Mets traded today was Max Scherzer from their rotation next year. They ate money down, and they get a prospect that they have full control over that hopefully will be part of their team for a very long time and will pan out. And this is not a trade like the last one with David Robertson, where you were getting some lottery tickets, albeit good lottery tickets, but lottery tickets that are a lot further away. This is a guy that's in Double-A that has an ETA of next year. So that helps their team next season. And then the question becomes, how do you replace Scherzer? And this year, whatever. David Peterson slides back into the rotation. It doesn't matter. The thought more is next year. And I think the idea is for the money, okay, that you save next year, and the fact that money doesn't even matter much on Scherzer, let's be honest. And who knows, maybe the Mets, I wouldn't be surprised if the Mets ate all of his salary this year, and they freed up more financial flexibility for 2024. That would make a lot of sense to me. If the Rangers were paying like his minimum this year and $22 million next year, that would not surprise me at all. But the money that you save on the books next year, plus the fact that Steve Cohen just has an insanely deep pocket anyway, they're going to go out and get a starter in the offseason, that likely means. Now, is that one of these free agents, or is it Yamamoto, who I was talking about on yesterday's show? So there's a very good chance it is Yamamoto, and suddenly, if your rotation next year is Justin Verlander, Kodai Senga, Yamamoto, and Jose Quintana, you have a pretty good rotation still. So the onus is going to be on the Mets to replace Scherzer next year, but I think they felt like it was a lot easier to replace Scherzer next year than Verlander, and now I think they also know the market was probably healthier for Verlander. So they get the Scherzer deal done first. Now they can really try to leverage teams and get the best possible offer for Verlander if they choose to deal him, and honestly, they don't have to. They can hang on to him for the rest of this season, let him pitch out next year as their ace when they're still planning to contend. And he picks up, or that vesting option hits if he throws 140 innings. Well, now you got him for an extra year after that. So they hang on to the better of the two aces, and they get a really good prospect. I want to talk about him next before we get into what's next for the Mets at the deadline. Before we get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever been in the situation where you want to go to the game, but you're having a hard time finding tickets? It's just too stressful. You decide not to go. Well, Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, so you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for all the fun you're going to have at the game. The Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seats before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds. 2 taps, you're all set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. You can snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, so who do the Mets get back in the Max Scherzer trade? They bought a prospect. That's basically what they did here. They spent $35 million and they gave up a player option on Scherzer for next year for a prospect. It's an expensive cost when you're Steve Cohen. It don't matter. This guy becomes the top prospect in the Mets system, and that is Luisangel Acuna. He's hitting .315, .377 on base percentage, .453 slug in Double-A this year across 84 games, 7 home runs, 25 doubles, 2 triples, 51 runs driven in. He's got 42 stolen bases. He had 8 stolen bases in 21 games of the Fall League this year, where he, performed okay. He didn't do great in the Fall League, but last year in High A, he stole 28 out of 34, hit .317, .417 on base, .483 slug. This guy plays shortstop and was profiling to be able to stay at the position. Now with Lindor, you see him move off the position likely. Does that mean he's the second baseman of the future potentially? I think that's certainly in the cards. Is he playing right field like his brother? I don't know. I don't know how the Mets are going to line him up positionally. He is a really good athlete, okay? I think because the Mets have Lindor and Nimmo, it makes things a little more complicated because I think, for another team that would have Acuña in their system, it would be shortstop, center as the two primary positions you want to look to put him at. But honestly, for the Mets and for what they need, and you're looking at 2024, I think it's probably second base is my guess. And Jeff McNeil's in the outfield, which might be better for McNeil anyway. All of a sudden, if you look at and I honestly believe that Acuña is the type of prospect where maybe he doesn't break camp next year, but he's going to be in that same boat that Alvarez was going into the year and Beatty was. And how quickly he can perform at the big league level is a question for another day. But it is a really good prospect to get here. And a guy that you feel very good about him being able to be a big leaguer soon and a good one. And that's why you make this deal, because like I was talking about on yesterday's show, you can listen to that show, right? And just essentially focus in on everything I was saying and flip it for Max Scherzer. I said, if you're going to trade Justin Verlander, it's got to be for a can't-miss type prospect. And they get one in Acuña. And you're thinking about the way the lineup is constructed next year, and you could see a world where the Mets are a lot younger and a lot better, where it's Beatty, hopefully he has a good rest of the season and he's more established. It's Alvarez, and you could have Acuña in that lineup. You could have Mauricio. You could have Vientos. There's a lot of people a lot of prospects that could be impacting this team. So the Mets are getting a lot younger with their position players. And ultimately, this is a trade that you make to reset your window. And pinning your hopes to 2 aces in their 40s, and Scherzer just turned 39, he would have turned 40 next season. Maybe that was not the proper build. And yes, the Mets still need pitching. But maybe you sign more pitching in the offseason. Maybe in one of these trades that you still make at this deadline, you get pitching. But the Mets are proving to be one of the most active sellers. They are selling as aggressively as they bought in the offseason. And that is going to transform this farm system overnight. And that's what I want to get to in the final segment here. What is next? What else can the Mets do? Because this is the type of trade that we were talking about for a while now, where the money has been leveraged to get a really good player into your system. Again, a guy that now, because of the graduation of Alvarez and Beatty, a guy that's going to slot in and be the best prospect in the system right now. And I can't get mad at that, especially when you think about the way Scherzer pitched this season. It's not to say he's not a good pitcher. I still think he is, and he might have a great run with the Rangers. But he was not a good big game pitcher with the Mets. For whatever reason, he didn't come through in the games that mattered most. And he gave up a ton of home runs this year. I don't know what he looks like next year. I know that for the long-term health of the franchise, the Mets are much better off with Acuña than Scherzer. And you got to start thinking long-term when your team plays as bad as it did so far this season. But is Verlander going to move next? We're going to talk about that first, though. Another word from our sponsors. The New York Mets play the Washington Nationals 1:10 Eastern Time today. Catch every pitch of the Mets' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Mets. Well, what is next for this Mets team? Okay, Justin Verlander is the big question mark. Everyone thought it'd be Verlander that would move, myself included. Now Scherzer's gone. Do you just cash it all in? Do you gut your rotation for next year? Focus on maybe even, it's not going to be a rebuild because they're going to try to win in 2024, but a real retool to the point where you trade Verlander for the pitching prospect equivalent of Acuña, and you're going to roll the dice that type of a guy can be an impact pitcher in the rotation next year. Or there is a world where something like that happens, but it's going to be very hard to replace both these guys in free agency. And that's why I always thought that it was going to be one or the other. And I just felt like it was going to be Verlander move because I thought he'd have more value. The fact that you got Acuña for Scherzer, granted by eating $35 million, but still, I think that's really interesting. And maybe the Mets are making the argument to teams that we're not eating down Verlander much. And they're leveraging that money aspect of it. You want us to eat it down to what number? You want us to eat it down to 30 next season? Well, $13 million is going to cost you prospect X, Y, and Z. And I think there is a world where because money is so much more important behind the scenes than any of us give credit, that you could get more of a haul for Justin Verlander because he's pitching better. And more teams might be in it. And now, with Scherzer off the market too, you're looking, and now it seems Stroman's going to stay. There's not a lot of rental arms that could, be big game pitchers like Justin Verlander. So that's a crazy domino that can still fall. And I'm not sure which way it goes. I can absolutely see the argument, and I think I probably would lean this way, that if you still want to win in 2024, you're better off just keeping Verlander and running this thing out for the year and knowing that he's going to be your ace next year. It's a safer move if you're trying to win next season. But if you're just like, we'll worry about building the 2024 roster in the offseason and we'll have the resources to do it, and maybe you can get Yamamoto and Nola. I don't know if that's the best way to spend money as far as Nola's concerned with the way he's pitched at points this season, but the bottom line is that could be the line of tickets. Hey, we're all in on selling the same way we've been all in on buying, and we're going to get 125 to 150 cents on the dollar on as many pieces as we can, and we're going to focus on building the farm the way we focused on building our ball club. And if that is the case, and if that's what the Mets are doing, well, then you can't really blame them for trading Justin Verlander, and you just hope that they get a really good return that pans out. Because even as much as everyone is praising Acuña right now as a great prospect to get in this deal, and a guy that is now the top prospect in the Mets system, he's still a prospect. Brett Beatty was putting up numbers last year better than Acuña, I would say. Got a promotion to triple, and this year he hasn't hit at the big league level. So there's every chance, as great as Acuña's been, you call him up next year, he might have a 650 OPS. That's on the table. So it's still prospects. There's still risk in it. But if they trade Verlander, I imagine it's going to be for an even better haul than what they just got. And they just got a pretty good prospect haul. Just getting one guy that slots to be your number one. How often does a team trade for their number one overall prospect? Unless their farm just completely sucks. And Granted, the Mets don't have the best farm after the graduations this year, but still, it is kind of nuts to think that for a guy that hadn't pitched well this year, you were able to get the best prospect in your system now. So I think that's the big question right now is what do they do with Verlander? And these other guys, Mark Canha, Tommy Pham, they're rentals. They're rentals. And you saw what you got for Robertson. And I imagine it might be that equivalent. You might get that 18-year-old, 19-year-old that a team really doesn't want to give up but is willing to because they want to win this year, but it's far away. Or maybe you get a higher floor guy. Maybe you get an arm for either of those guys. Probably not a great arm, but maybe you get another team's equivalent to a Mike Vassell. You get another version of Coleman Crow that you got from the Angels for Eduardo Escobar, maybe something a little bit better. I think those are the trades that are out there. And I also think that the Mets can turn a piece like Omar Narvaez into prospects because they don't really need a backup catcher anyway. If they eat down that money for another team, Narvaez could be valuable. Quintana on the table. But again, how much starting pitching can you trade if you still want to win next year? And honestly, even though they made this deal, I also don't entirely know if the Mets want to completely be awful down the stretch either. I don't know if they're going to trade Adam Ottavino and Brooks Raley just to get anything back. So, we'll see. We'll see. The Mets might go that approach. If they make 2 more trades tomorrow, then I think we'll have a pretty good indication. This could have been the Mets basically saying, we got to trade one of them, and liking the idea of keeping Verlander more than keeping Scherzer, liking the prospect that they were able to pry from the Rangers to give up Scherzer and to keep Verlander. And they just decided, all right, we'll make this deal now. We'll hold Verlander. We'll flip the other guys for whatever we can, the 2 clear rentals in Canha and Pham. We'll listen on everyone else. But there's one thing that we've learned right now is the Mets have us all just locked into what they're doing. And I'll tell you what, I won't be going on vacation the next 3 days. I'll be coming home tomorrow. So we'll be back video as well as audio for all you everydayers. Make sure you are following wherever you get your podcast, subscribing on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to catch every pitch of the Mets hometown broadcast, you can do so with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Mets.